Your thesis statement acts as a roadmap for the rest of your paper. You've laid out a point that gives your readers an expectation. Let's talk about how and why to make sure your thesis statement is clear and consistent. Why does it matter if you have a clear and consistent thesis statement? They can read the paper, they understand where you're at by the end. Well, if your thesis statement tells your reader one thing, but then your paper does something else, the reader is likely to get confused, frustrated, or even just stop reading altogether. You want your thesis statement to point toward the heart of your paper. Sure, you're going to add other information as you go, but if it can't be connected back to your thesis statement, then that's a sign that you need to revise. Let's take a look at some of the reasons your thesis statement might need to be revised. A lot of times, writers will start their paper with an opinion or an idea in mind. They'll write this into their first draft. Then they'll go on and conduct research, write the rest of the paper, and end up with a conclusion. Sometimes, though, what you thought you were going to write about and what you actually ended up writing about aren't the same thing. Let's say you thought you were going to write an informative paper about animals and circuses and how some people boycott them today because of animal welfare concerns. This is a fine thesis statement. It's clear, it's direct, it's focused. The use of animals in circuses has long been a source of contention, and it continues to be a reason some people boycott the circus today. However, in this case, as you did your research, you ended up getting more interested in what policies and procedures have been put in place to ensure that the animals are treated well. You don't really end up talking about boycotts at all in your paper. If your reader sees this in your introduction and then gets to the end and it's not really about boycotting circuses, they're going to be confused. At this point, you have two options. You could do new research and rewrite the entire paper to fit the original thesis statement, focusing more fully on the history of boycotts of circuses and modern day boycotts. Or, and this is probably the better option, we could simply revise our thesis statement to fit the paper we actually ended up writing. So take a look at this new thesis statement. The use of animals in circuses has long been a source of contention, and many new policies have been put in place to address these concerns. In this new thesis statement, you make sure that the focus is on the actual topic you ended up writing about. It's really important to understand that discovering new ideas as you write and changing your thesis statement to match them does not mean you made a mistake. Gathering new information by digging deep and finding out something that you didn't know before is one of the main points of writing. It's often a sign that you did a thorough and meaningful job if you end up having to shift your thesis to match the hard work that you did. A related issue is that instead of finding a different version of the topic, you could have just completely changed your mind as you wrote. In that case, your thesis statement might be unclear if it represents your old views, but not the views you ended up with by the end of the paper. This can be especially true in argumentative papers. You may start out believing one thing, but over the course of researching and writing about the topic, you might end up with a completely different opinion. Let's say that you start out writing an argumentative paper on whether or not we should have seatbelt laws. At the beginning, your opinion is that seatbelt laws are a government overreach that shouldn't exist. So you write your thesis statement with that goal in mind. Everything's going fine as you write about the history of seatbelt laws and how they've changed over the years, but by the end of the paper, you've discovered that you've changed your mind. Once you've learned more about the statistics of car crashes and the lives saved, you decide we really should have seatbelt laws. It can be tempting to stick to your original idea. After all, this is what you believed just a week ago. However, it's important to remember that the point of writing isn't just to share your ideas with readers, it's to discover new ideas and question your own assumptions. Writing is a critical thinking exercise, and being willing to change your mind when faced with new evidence is the mark of strong thinking. It's not only okay to change your thesis statement, it's necessary to match your new point of view. So in this case, maybe I rewrite it and I say, while some may see seatbelt laws as a government overreach, their substantial benefits outweigh these concerns. Another problem that might happen and cause you to have an unclear and inconsistent thesis statement is that you didn't know what you wanted to say when you started writing. If you're writing an informative essay, maybe you didn't know enough about the topic yet to pick a specific focus. If you're writing an argumentative paper, maybe you didn't know enough about it to have an opinion. But when you started writing, you wanted to make sure you had an introduction, so you wrote a thesis statement that didn't really do much work. So let's say you chose to talk about gender representation in Disney movies, and you hadn't really thought about that topic before, so you weren't really sure what to say about it. So let's take a look at this thesis statement. Disney has made many movies that send messages about gender roles. That's not really very useful. Your reader probably already knows that, and it doesn't give a sense of what specific topic you're going to tackle in this paper. It's kind of a placeholder. It's meant to be like, hey, this is under construction. I'm coming back to this. So that's fine, but you have to remember to actually come back and fix it up when you finish the rest of your rough draft and figure out what it is you actually want to say. A clearer thesis statement will be easier to write after you've written the rest of your draft and figured out what you want to say. Here's an example of my revised thesis statement. Recent Disney movies have attempted to offer more autonomy to female characters, but there is still work to be done to improve gender representation. This thesis statement suggests a paper that's going to look at past and present Disney movies, the way they handle autonomy in female characters, and what could still be done to improve gender representation in the future. It's an ambitious paper with a clear focus. Sometimes you have no idea what you want to say yet, so you just don't. You don't write a thesis statement at all. You might skip the entire introduction and just jump right into the background of your topic and keep working and writing your paper. As you write, you figure out what you want to say, and now you have a strong paper, except it doesn't have an introduction or a thesis statement. This actually happens to me all the time. I'll often just skip writing the introduction, and by the time I get to the end, I've found it. I usually find it in the conclusion, so what I end up doing is cutting my conclusion off. I literally copy and paste it, or cut and paste it, move it to the top of my paper, rewrite it a little bit to turn it into an introduction, and then go back and write a new conclusion. Voila, thesis statement in place. So remember, the thesis statement is a roadmap that lets your reader know what to expect as they go forward in your paper. If the directions you gave early on weren't accurate, you want to fix them now that you have a better sense of your destination. Some final tips to remember. Always revisit your thesis statement when you finish your rough draft to make sure that it is clear and consistent. Don't be afraid to change your mind. That's the mark of good thinking. And remember that it's often easier to change your thesis statement to match what you actually wrote about than it is to rewrite the whole rest of your paper to match your old thesis statement.